Good morning, everyone. My name's Irene McAleese. I'm co-founder of See.Sense, and I'll be facilitating the session today. I'm joined by David Walker from RoSPA. He's the head of road safety and leisure at RoSPA. Also, Philip McAleese, co-founder and CEO of See.Sense, and Christopher Kerrigan from Transport for West Midlands, who's working as a data and performance analyst there. So we have actually two presentations for you in this session. So we will be trying to get across quite a lot of information in the hour that we have, but there is time in the session for questions and discussion as well. So we've built some of that time in amongst the two presentations that we have. Firstly, we just wanted to kick off with a poll. So if you can see the poll that we have in the tab there, I'd like to get your thoughts on what is the biggest barrier in helping to get more people cycle. If you were listening to the presentation this morning from Rupert Furness, you may have heard this answer, but let's just take a quick poll from the audience to see what your thoughts are on that. And let's see if we can see the answers. I'm not sure how I see the answers that come through actually to say show results. Okay. I can't see the answers. I'm sure that there's lots of people responding. Can you see, Philip?
Yes, the quickest way is if you vote, you'll see the answers straight away.
If you click on
if
one?
You vote.
If you
enter
vote on it. Okay. Great. So far we're seeing safety and perception of safety coming out at 64%, followed by lack of cycling culture at 24%, infrastructure, lack of infrastructure at 12%, and no one's voted for access to a bike yet in the poll. So interesting food for thought there. With the safety and perception of safety coming up the highest, I guess that's what we would expect, and that's certainly what was mentioned this morning in the opening session. But yeah, I do agree that there is the requirement for a cycling culture is really important as well, and it's very interesting to see that come up as a second point. Let's do another quick poll before we start. Given, I suppose, that safety and the perception of safety has come out as the highest ranking one, it's quite pertinent to think then about what data cities currently use to understand safety risks to cyclists. So if everybody could please vote now on your response to that. Okay, and what we're seeing so far is the Stats 19 reports definitely coming out the highest, followed by, hey, there's just not a lot of data available, coming second highest. Reports that are made directly to councils, like such as potholes, or others at 12.5. And intercept surveys, so this is where cyclists are actually stopped and asked to complete surveys on their journey, coming in the lowest there. So it's really interesting that, I guess people are identifying safety as one of the biggest barriers, yet the data to look at that up until now has been quite limited. And even, I guess, those Stats 19 reports, while obviously useful, do have some challenges in helping to understand safety. So thank you very much for your feedback on those points. I think that's a really good kickoff to the session today and provides some good context for the two things that we'll be covering. So the first is the Cycle Smart Brum project that RoSPA and See.Sense have worked together in partnership on, which is designed to give more insights into safety and more understanding about cycling collisions. So I'm going to hand to David and Philip to lead that presentation. And then following that, there will be time for some questions before we then go into the next presentation with Christopher, where we'll be talking about the project about to launch it with Transport for West Midlands, and Christopher will walk us through the project, how they'll be using See.Sense data there and the types of insights that they plan to apply and use. So without further ado, I'm going to now share the presentation for the Smart Brum project. Yes. Okay, so over to you then, David.
Okay, thanks, Irene, and good morning, everybody, and thanks for the invitation to speak about this project that we're really excited at in RoSPA. From our perception, cycling is important. So as RoSPA's head of road and leisure safety, over the last couple of years, we've done quite a lot of thinking about where we want to be with cycling and active travel and where we want to go. And this project is one of the first wave of really important projects for us that you'll see coming from RoSPA over the next couple of years. So conscious that I'm speaking to a room of specialists, but I'm sure you've seen these quotes before, but obviously Gear Change, seminal report telling us to shift and do more on cycling. Big fact or big pull quote for me really is that yet 2/3 of adult cyclists feel it's not safe. And that really does resonate with me as a occasional cyclist in Birmingham and in other parts of the country, but it's a real big issue that we need to change. And then obviously reflecting some of the comments in the plenary sessions this morning and some of your feedback, safer roads, safer cycle lanes, safer segregated cycle paths. So these are all nothing new I would expect to the audience. But what we've tried to do with this project, and one of our ambitions and one of the limiting factors for us over the last couple of years, is really trying to quantify that lived experience of the cyclist. You know, we see, you know, cycling harm in a couple of settings in my perception. Stats 19 in a very anodyne way, maybe you know, once every 15 months there's a number that comes out, and often it's quite an abstract piece of information to a lot of people. You see the press reports about cycling fatalities and serious and life-changing events, which again pop up, but they don't necessarily impact on policymakers and impact on others in the way that we feel they should. And then obviously the conversation that you see most commonly on Twitter and other places. So one of the things that we wanted to see, and one of the reasons why we were so excited to do this project with See.Sense, is to say, well, actually, how do we capture that lived experience of the cyclists, capture their perceptions of the hazards and the safety issues that they see in a way that's easy for them, or even frictionless for them to do, and convert that into an actual useful tool that we can start to get ahead of the next fatal event. And that for me is the principal long-term objective for us, is to get ahead of stats 19, to get ahead of some of those conversations, and to be able to say, here and here are the places, not just hundreds of kilometers you need to work at. Here's the 50 places that you need to be thinking about, and actually turn it into a pragmatic, practical decision-making tool. Do you want to jump to the next slide, please, Irene? So, as I said, better data for me was one of the starting points when we looked at this. We know about stats 19. We know about some of the other limitations with the data, and I'm sure this audience can articulate that a lot better than me. But when we started this, we thought conceptually there were a couple of things that we would like to know. And when we were looking for partners with this project and working, See.Sense's data and technology platform aligned really, really beautifully with this. But we know that braking, we know that near miss or swerve events, and we know that other conditions around the road are predictors are indicative of crash events. So what we wanted to do really was build a data layer, build a model which build a model which builds enough data for us to make a valid assessment of current state, and ideally also some sort of associative or predictive layer for future state as well. So we can start to sit down and say, this at city scale or at a ward level or at even at micro level beyond that, these are the sorts of harms that we're seeing in these spaces today, and these are indicative of future activity as well. And that really was the gold standard missing piece of information for us, and that was one of the objectives with the project. So a couple of key things we set out to do really was to compare crowdsourced data from the experience of cyclists, and we achieved that, and we're going to talk about that in more detail, to take a set of data at the right scale and to see if that can tell us something about future state and about future options as well. So is that an associative or predicative model? And then really then to dig into these hazard indicators or collisions and actually start to look at that in the context of the environment, because very much we all know, again, in this room, that the cyclists' behaviours, skills and actual driving on the road will contribute to that, but that's a very small slice of what the actual overall picture is and what drives those decisions. And as before, we rightly talked about junctions and other environments. So we had some quite big ambitions at the start of this, and quite frankly, when I started and I looked at this project, I'm like, I wasn't sure if we could achieve that. And I'm without stealing too much of Phil's thunder, there is a lot of good news to share there. So Phil's going to run you through some of the technical work that the team, including Holly, who's in the workshop today, did on this project, and then we'll take you through what we think it means and what the next steps are.
Great. Thank you, David. So I'm Philip McAleese. I was a cycle commuter, and I developed this technology, which all of the project is based around. It looks like a regular bike light, but it's crammed with communications and sensor technology, and that allows it to profile its environment and the rider up to 800 times every second to get some never-before-seen insights around not only where we travel, but how we travel around our road network. Next slide, please. So the question, of course, is why do we need sensors in the bike light? Why just not use a mobile app, as many people do these days? And the answer is really about the granularity of the data. So using a mobile phone, we can get perhaps something like 10 readings per second from the accelerometer, and that gives us not an unreasonable picture. We can kind of guess that the picture on the left is the Mona Lisa, but with the 800 readings a second, 80 times greater resolution, we can see much more of the nuances and subtleties, and so we get a much better picture about what it is that we're looking at. Next slide, please. And of course, why does a cyclist need a smart bike light? Well, we all know that most cycling accidents occur at or near road junctions in urban areas and during daylight hours. And so we wanted a light that would react to its environment, that would have some sense of where it was and the environment around it and what the cyclist was doing, to enable it to react to things like road junctions, roundabouts, filtering in traffic and car headlights, situations where we know statistically that the cyclist may be slightly less safe than in other situations. And in those circumstances, it will flash brighter and faster to help keep the cyclist visible to other road users. Next slide, please. And the key thing here is, of course, daylight visibility. Most accidents occur during the day. We've all seen that cars since 2011 have daylight visible lights to enable them to be seen. That's European legislation that was brought in 2011 because it reduces collisions between cars by between 5 and 10%. And so our premise is if something as big as a car needs it, then a cyclist will obviously benefit from that as well. And then integrating into the mobile app for users that opt into data and pair it with their mobile phone, this really unlocks and takes things to a whole new level. So it enables crash and theft alerts to the cyclist, as well as ride stats. But it also allows us to start to crowdsource some community insights, so people can drop pins and let us know where something concerned them. They can drop pins, let us know where they think the infrastructure could be improved. And then we get the perception layer as well as the actual underlying data to see what their experience was and what the experience of other cyclists in that location is as well. And this is really the bringing all that together. We get insights that have never before been seen. If we start on the right with the journey mapping, we can obviously see the popular routes, the speed, the dwell time, the origin destination analysis. Now that can obviously be done by lots of different applications and ways of doing that at the moment. But really what we're doing is we're going much deeper than that. We're saying, where are people swerving and braking? Where are the collisions happening? Where are they dropping pins and informing us about challenges? What is the road surface? What's it like? How well is it performing? Is it improving or deteriorating over time? And so we're analyzing not just where people go, but how they go, what their experiences are. And that gives us a completely new way of looking at things. Next slide, please. Great. So as part of the Smart Brum project, we recruited quite a few cyclists. They were very kind in cycling more than 42,000 kilometers to furnish us with the almost 800 million data points, which we can analyze in a lot of detail. We found a lot of things during this process. We answered a lot of questions and found a lot more new ones that we wanted to find out. We discovered that analyzing 10 meter by 10 meter squares was kind of the Goldilocks size, where not too big, such that you're looking at both sides of a junction, but not too small that you're aggregating it up to a very small level. We did a lot of filtering to filter out where we didn't have many journeys or we didn't have many cyclists. And we ran a number of focus groups looking at specific areas to understand better what people's experiences were and to compare that with the data. I guess the headline figures of what we found, next slide please, were that when you're in proximity to a known Stats 19 location where a cyclist has been injured or killed, then you are 2.4 times more likely to experience a significant brake or swerve event in that location. Interestingly, it wasn't about how hard people were braking, because you can come up, if you're going down a hill towards a road junction, you can brake quite hard and have quite a large deceleration force. That doesn't really represent an unplanned event. What we actually looked at here was the speed at which people applied their brakes. So where you're planning to apply the brakes, you'll apply them progressively and quite slowly. Where something unexpected happens, a pedestrian steps out in front of you, you spot a pothole in the road that you hadn't previously seen, you'll snatch the brakes and pull them on in a much more rapid fashion than you would otherwise. And so we actually measure that and see how quickly are people transitioning to brake. We do the same with swerving, and the higher the indications we get, the closer it tends to be to Stats 19 locations. And so we took all of this and we modeled it and we said, where are we seeing the biggest incidences of those braking and swerve activities? We plotted that alongside the Stats 19 locations. And what you can see here is that the red circles are our indications from data that we collected during the project as to where people were swerving and braking. The smaller dots are the Stats 19. And you can see on a number of them, particularly down in the bottom left there's an area which is, I believe, currently being redeveloped. And you can see some really big indications and unfortunately some Stats 19 locations as well, which correlate quite nicely. And then up in the north, we see some good correlations as well. But interestingly, some areas where we're seeing big indications, but thankfully no Stats 19 incidents. And if we go to the next slide, this is where we start to uncover some of the ground truths. So on the left, this is one of the pedestrian bridges over Birmingham. We can see that it's cobblestoned. Those cobblestones have been there for a great many number of decades and have been worn smooth. You can see that there's actually a sort of a ladder effect that they've added in to add some extra level of grip. So it's no great surprise that we find the ground truth there is in fact that these things are very slippy, probably incredibly treacherous when wet, and so to see an indication there is not unexpected. On the right hand side we see a road which is really quite interesting. There's a central reservation which prevents right hand turns. There are no junctions on the left hand side for left hand turns, so you've got straight laminar flow of traffic. You've got a separate bicycle lane. You've got good space for share bike parking. We can't quite see it, but you've got a very wide pedestrian footpath as well, covered over by trees. And you've got a pedestrian crossing, which is controlled with lights and has barriers as well. So looking at this, nothing obvious to indicate that anything untoward maybe happening there. But when we look at the data, we see that there is a lot of braking and swerving happening just about the traffic lights. Now, in this example, we don't know what the ground truth is. There's a strong indication there that says we should go and have a look at it. But what we believe may be happening is that when the periods are quieter for road traffic, bicycles are quite quiet, and the people are exiting the park on the left, not being aware of the cyclist, as perhaps they're on their mobile phone or thinking about other things or otherwise distracted, and perhaps stepping out in front of the cyclist. So nothing wrong with the design, but just interesting in how it's behaving in real life.
Mm-hmm. And you're probably going to ask me to go to the next slide, Philip, and I just realized I've actually uploaded an older version of this presentation, so I don't have the formatting on it, but just from memory, are you able to talk through the slide, or I can cover the points? It was basically the recap slide at the end. Oh, that might have been David, actually, was going to cover that.
It was David. You're on mute, David.
Okay, yeah, no problems. I've got it here, Irene. So just to recap, the project really held true for the hazard indicators, as Philip's just detailed, articulated much better than I could. Some of the things we're doing now is we're working with local authorities and we're talking to DFT and others to actually start to look at these sorts of locations and make sense in a bit more detail of what these plate spaces on the right are. We know that the predictive layer is of use, we know it's valid, and we know it can be applied. And then the next steps are how and what does this mean for ground truth spaces, and how can we get ahead of the next event, really. And I think that one of the asks for us today as a group is to say, if you'd like to have a look at this in a bit more detail, or if we'd love to have a conversation with you to start to look at these local spaces and start to see what it means for ourselves and for the project going forward.
Great. Very well summed up. Thank you, David. Thanks both Philip and David for that presentation. And now I guess I'd just like to check and see if we have any comments there. There's a comment there from Martin about use of the term accidents.
Yes, I can take that one. I believe that if it was me that used the term accident, my apologies. I am a cycle commuter. I have been hit by a drunk driver and hospitalized, and I can assure you that I don't believe there was anything particularly accidental about that. It was entirely avoidable. So yes, if I used the term accident, my apologies. I did indeed mean collision.
Yeah, we do tend to usually use that word, so yeah, apologies for that. Are there any other comments that anyone would like to pop into the channel now that we could answer? So we do have a question here about would this include collisions with pedestrians?
So yes, it can. It's fairly rare in the Stats19 database to find that, but yes, vehicle one can be a cyclist and the other party can indeed be a pedestrian.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And there's another question here from Ryan. Once hazardous areas were identified, what were cyclists communicated with to inform them of this? And if so, how was this communicated?
So I guess we did share back the findings. I mean, what we should add is that the amount of braking and swerving that we saw was still incredibly infrequent. So at a Stats19 location, you're perhaps looking at one journey in 60 that may have a brake or swerve event. So it's not that we felt that these were disproportionately dangerous or areas that should be particularly avoided. I mean, obviously it's useful information and people can make their own decisions around what risk level they're willing to take. And we've done a lot of research around different genders and their decisions around routing and so on. So it is incredibly valuable data for people to use and understand. And yeah, we did share that back with the participants.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things on this project, if I could just add to that as well, is that the participants, there were 200 participants in the Birmingham area. The project ran for a 6 months period. So during that period, there was a newsletter that went back to the participants, starting to share sort of insights that were coming through. There were also focus groups that RoSPA ran as well with the participants who engaged with the project. And really the idea is that all of those pins that are dropped in the map, that where the reports are that people have made, are actually visible on the See.Sense website. People can go in and see that in the area. Those pins were actually shared with Christopher and the team in Transport for West Midlands as well. So he'll talk a little bit more about how those insights were actually picked up and used in the next presentation for the benefit of cyclists. So a question here about it, with the data being recorded, is there a data cleaning process for the self-reported incidents after the ride?
Yeah, we do qualify those reports versus the data that we see. So obviously if someone reports that they've been involved in a collision, then we'll have data from the telemetry of the bike, which will indicate the nature and severity of that. So we have done full collision analysis of those. Thankfully, they're fairly rare, so we can more or less clean them manually.
Just to come to Naomi's question, yeah, I mean, very much, yeah, that was one of the central objectives, was for us to be able to get ahead of Stats 19 to validate the significant incidents that end up in Stats 19, but also to find out additional ways to identify those incidents before they end up in Stats 19, because we know that often when there's an incident in Stats 19, there's often been a cluster and preceding indicators, which is really the central point, Naomi. And the point of highlighting the canal space versus the road space was to show where the system's identifying, you know, a really obvious area where you would expect to see that, and you know, a 30-second, 30-minute assessment by an inspector would find that, versus actually the road space, which isn't as straightforward to maybe identify what's going wrong, and maybe wouldn't get looked at all until we start to see a serious or life-changing incident.
And question from James, can local authorities access their data for their areas? Is the data open source? Do you want to take that one, Philip?
Sure. So the data isn't open source. We are a company, and so we have to cover our costs of running it and processing the data. We do want to make it very cost effective. We are a company of cyclists. We're very interested in getting more people on bikes, improving cycle safety, and seeing active transport in general improve. So it's very affordable. It's not designed to be overly expensive. And we'd be delighted to have a conversation with you around how you can access it and what might be available already within your local area.
We do actually make the reports that people drop, the pins in the map is actually available as well. So you can go and see those where they've been dropped across the UK and Ireland. Actually, you can see all that for free. And if you are a local authority and you want to access those pins and have the file, we will give that to you for free. So that's a free service that we launched last year during COVID, because we really want to see that data used. And Christopher will talk to you just about how powerful even those pins being dropped can be in a moment. But there is obviously the sensor data, and the work involved in the analysis for that does have some processing work for us to do. So we do need to have a license to access that component. Okay, I think we've come to the end of the questions in that section. So just in interest of time, I'm going to move on now to Christopher's presentation. So I'll just see if I can get that to share now.
I'm just going to click through because I've been silent too long. So get my speaking voice on.
Great. Over to you. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so my name's Chris, and I'm a senior performance analyst in the data insight team at Transport for West Midlands. And we could go forward. Thank you. So, as most of you probably will know, what the Active Travel Fund is, but I just will give a bit of context in case. So, in 2020, DFT provided Transport for West Midlands and its 7 partner authorities 13 million for delivering its tranche 2 of the Active Travel Scheme. The key aim is to get more people cycling and walking, and the main focus is to invest in ATF infrastructure, which will make it safer and easier for people to walk and cycle. The key aim of the ATF program is to get more people from their key destinations and removing barriers that prevent them from making journeys on bike and foot. The funding was also funded some active travel schemes focusing on supporting a green, low-carbon recovery. This will include pop-up cycle lanes, walking improvements in local centres, and further developments, such as places for people and city centre segment schemes. We just go forward, sorry. So this is our publicly available map infographic that shows the active trail infrastructure, which has to be delivered by next year. And all information we've got, further information regarding this is available in our public hub, our travel trends hub, the link there, and it's publicly available. What I wanted to say about this was that the ATF money was an extension of the ATF, where you saw temporary pop-up lanes and cycle lanes, and now you have permanent cycle lanes. So in Coventry, there are 3 schemes, and it's one of these permanent schemes connecting University of Warwick to local business parks that the focus of the C.Sense project becomes. If you go to the next slide, please, Irene. So my voice is shaking a bit.
No problem. No problem, Chris.
So alongside the Active Travel Fund, we are delivering regional supporting measures. This is focused on behavioural change. So what this means is a supporting suite of measures and projects that provide access and opportunities, such as events, signposting and grants, for individuals, organisations, community groups, families, schools and more. These programmes will tackle common barriers to entry, confidence training, lack of equipment, and give people a chance to give active travel a go. Some of these projects will include free parking, will include encouraging GP practices to prescribe cycling and walking to patients. And a key aspect of the supporting measures is communication and relaying as much information as we can back to the public and to encourage behavioural change towards adopting an active travel approach to their mode, basically. If you can go to the next one, please. So here's an overview of some of the partners we're working with for these supporting measures. And as you can see, we have C.Sense in there. And what I want to talk about now is the fact that we use the self-reported data from C.Sense to allow us to build upon our road safety campaign with West Midlands Police and West Midlands Fire. So we launched a number of close pass campaigns this summer, and we needed to decide the locations for these campaigns. There are 23 in total. And in order to do that, we were a bit stumped. I mean, we had the Stats 19 data, we had our infrastructure data, but we didn't really have anything else to quantify what a close pass would be. But with the self-reported data from C.Sense, close pass is actually an incident you can report. So it added an extra layer to the analysis that was previously unavailable. Just something to comment on is the fact that this all ties into our regional approach in West Midlands with our West Midlands Road Safety Group to decrease KSI incidents by 40% over the next decade. And so it shows how important this piece of work actually is. So go to the next, and I'll show you what we did in ArcGIS. So this is where I'm more comfortable talking about maps and things, okay? So in ArcGIS, we created a visualization overlaying the self-reported instance with the infrastructure and with the stats data. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see a zoomed in area. That's it. So this is the A45 Yardley scheme in Birmingham. And we identify with C.Sense data a number of close passes and other incidents. And so we decided to conduct 2 close pass campaigns along this route. And if it wasn't for the C.Sense data, we would have just picked places at random. So we actually had some degree of, it's difficult to understand me, sorry. Can you hear better now? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So it allows us to select the locations. So as David was saying previously, this data, which you can get for free, allows you to do some level analysis that is previously not necessarily able to do because you have actual quantifiable metrics to measure against. So if I can go to the next slide, I can talk to you about the whole range of data that we're getting for the actual project that we're investing for the regional package. So we are getting the self-reported data and also all the other data sets that See.Sense provides. So if I can talk to you about the actual project itself, which is focused on Coventry. So in the southwest of Coventry, we have a active trail fund permanent cycle route connecting University of Warwick to local business parks. It's about 3 kilometres in length. And we selected this area because not only is it adjacent to active trail fund infrastructure, but it has a high propensity of people that cycle, and residents are cycling to work, and students are cycling to other postcodes. So you can see here is a little corner on university and a corner on a business park, and we separated it out into 4 areas, which we will engage with the residents to provide them with 200 lights. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Okay. So what I wanted to make a point of, which I think David's already mentioned, is the value of the data that you get from See.Sense, as well as the self-reported incidents. So with the extra trail fund, we have to report back to DFT. A report next March about the usage of this infrastructure. So we've conducted a number of baseline surveys, which happen prior to schemes being installed, and it gives you a number of usage counts during a week period. However, you can go one step further and provide further insights with the range of See.Sense data. So you're not just looking at the count of cyclists on a scheme. You can see alternative routes opposed to that scheme. You can see the caliber of the roads and schemes. You can see whether people inherently felt the roads were safer elsewhere or whether the schemes were safe themselves. So it gives you that extra push, which is important for our local authority partners, because it is with them we design and build our infrastructure. So our LC whips and other schemes such as HS2, active travel routes, and the transformative city funds. These are data sets that we've never experienced before. We have never had access to. We were very reliant on utilizing things like current cycle parking, current infrastructure, opinions, and engagement with the limited community. And this way we can have, I feel, a means for non-analysts to look at the data and make some informed decisions. So we can go to the next slide. So this is the project in 4 stages. So stakeholder engagement is what we've currently embarked upon. So we've engaged with the public and our stakeholders. And as I said before about the road safety group, we also have walking officer group and the West Midlands Analyst, who we feedback from, and we get insight into where was the correct area for this project, what we want to get out of this project, how we're going to display the project back to our local authority partners and internally in TFWM, and also the public. So 200 lights are going to be provided to these people in this area, launching in October, which is the project launch, step 2. And then we go into the interesting part, which is part 3. Data collection is happening over a year. And during this 1 year, we will be providing regular newsletters to the participants, but also regular updates to our stakeholders. And we'll do that for a variety of means, which I'll talk about in a second, but it all comes down to data analysis. So predominantly, we will be producing an interactive tableau dashboard, but that has barriers in itself because it's not a public domain. And also it's although it's intuitive, it is for maps for an analyst to understand or a spatial analyst, and it's not for those people necessarily, it's for people who are making policy, infrastructure, behavioral changes within different of organizations. So we go to the next slide, please. Here we go. So the wide analysis. So as a concept with the self-reported data, we created in ArcGIS again a storyboard overlaying certain schemes and infrastructure or data sets. So non-analysts or LA partners or officers or policymakers can make their own decisions. So we had traffic collisions overlaid with the self-reported data. We have the LC whips, a local authority, and West Midlands LC whips. We had the emergency active travel fund, and we will have, like I said before, HS2 active travel routes. We'll have active travel fund, transforming cities, and a myriad of other schemes that will be happening in the future. We can add that level of behavioural change. We can understand how the actual cyclists are engaging and interacting with the road around them, and it's just uncanny. I mean, I've got no words for it. As an analyst, I'm just like mind blown. One last thing about that is data sharing. So we find it very important to make sure we have everything as completely as transparent as possible to the public. So for our recently launched Travel Trends Hub, we have a cycling walking page, which is constantly updated, completely up to date, and we'll have every quarter we'll have an update on the insights garnered from the data, and that will be completely visible to members of the public who want to engage with it, which I think is very important. And the next slide, here we go. So this is a other use case for data, which is not necessarily my area of expertise as an analyst, but working closely with our cycling and walking officers. You can use the data for determining whether a potential infrastructure route meets the core design principles, the 5 core design principles in designing, say, a new LC RIP route or say a new HS2 route or any new route that might come into being. So they are coherent, being direct, being safe, comfortable, and attractive. And here's some examples. So in terms of coherence, you obviously can see for the See.Sense data whether a route is popular, whether people are diverging from where current infrastructure exists, or whether, and then in turn, the actual desire paths, the actual hotspots, the actual where people are actually using the roads, where people are actually cycling around in a region. If it's direct, so you're popular, you have the origin destination data, which tells you a lot. So you have the precise route with any shortcuts, average speed, dwell time, junctions. It just gives you a greater picture of how a person will conduct individual route. Safety, obviously, we've always said beforehand, in terms of safety, we have your swerving, you have the braking, the road surface conditions. It adds that level of not just stats 19 data, where you're looking at a reported incident X amount of time afterwards, you're looking at in real time someone's experience, like how it is now, which is important. In terms of being comfortable, obviously the road surface quality, and the survey comments say the self-reported incidents is what I find quite interesting in this regard, because when you get the data through, people can leave quite verbose comments, and it allows you to give that insight or gleam into their actual understanding or experience of a route or a cycle ride in the region, which perhaps a quantitative piece of data might not give you. And attractiveness, again, if you're swerving, you're braking, and you're all over the place, perhaps it's not so attractive. Maybe you need to make sure it's a route where it's a nice, easy ride.
Great.
And that's it. Sorry about my quivering voice and my nervousness.
You did great. Thank you so much, Christopher. And that's really brought us to the end of that presentation. So just any quick questions anybody wants to ask, please pop them in the channel here on Chris's presentation. And I think that's all the questions that are in there. Martin is just trying to reiterate on the point discussed before. Is it closed source data, and does it have to be paid for? Philip, did you want to answer that one again?
Yeah, so again, we do have costs associated with obviously collection, processing, and analysis of that data. Because of GDPR as well, it tends to be a data source that we prefer to work with people to analyze rather than make it generally available as an open data set.
Okay, great. Well, look, conscious that we have come up to the end of our allocated time for the session, and I did promise you I wanted to let you go so you can keep to the schedule of all the other events that are happening. I will say that both See.Sense and RoSPA have a booth operating today, so there will be members of our respective teams in those booths, so please feel free to come and speak with us in the booth if you have any further questions at all. Yeah, thank you so much for your attention and your input today in the session. It's been really great and to have everyone's engagement. Thank you.